Sometimes love doesn't arrive with fireworks. Sometimes it finds you quietly, in a stranger's glance, in the silence between two heartbeats, in a place you never planned to stay. This is a story about unexpected moments, about letting go of fear, and about the kind of love that takes its time. Welcome to The Billionaire's Unexpected Guest, a slow-burn romance about two people learning how to be seen and choosing, against all odds, to stay. Lena hadn't meant to stay longer than a week. The guest cottage was charming. Stone walls, ivy-covered windows, and the distant scent of salt drifting in through the breeze. She'd chosen it randomly, a quick rental to clear her mind after a messy breakup and a job she left without saying goodbye. She didn't know it sat at the edge of a billionaire's private estate. She didn't care. Julian Hale hadn't meant to see her at all. He'd come here to disappear, from headlines, from boardrooms, from the noise that came with power and money. The cottage had been empty for years. He assumed it still was, until he saw her. It was early morning, and the fog had barely lifted when she stepped out barefoot into the garden. A cup in hand, hair tied loosely, wrapped in a robe too big for her. She didn't notice him watching from the upper window of the main house. She just stood there, sipping slowly, staring into the sea like it had something to tell her. He should have looked away, but there was something about her. How she moved slowly, like the world could wait. Like she'd made peace with silence. He hadn't. She hummed sometimes, sang softly under her breath when she thought no one could hear, walked the cliffside paths at dusk, read on the porch with her knees pulled to her chest. She smiled at the breeze. She laughed alone. Julian had met women who chased him. Lena didn't even know who he was. She didn't chase, she wandered, and somehow that unsettled him more than any headline ever had. The first words between them came by accident. She'd wandered too close to the old garden gate, camera in hand, and he'd stepped out to tell her she was on private land. But when she looked up at him with those wide, sunlit eyes, his words never came. Instead, she spoke first. "Is this yours?" He nodded. She smiled. "It's beautiful. I didn't mean to intrude." He could have said many things then. About boundaries, about privacy, about who he was. Instead, he said, "You're welcome to stay by the roses. They only bloom for a few weeks." She tilted her head. "Then I picked the perfect time." And for the first time in months, Julian felt something shift. Not in the air, but in him. Lena didn't know what to expect after their first meeting. She figured he'd vanish again, like smoke. He had that look, the kind of man who wore silence like armor, the kind who could disappear into a room without leaving a trace. But he didn't. The next morning, she found fresh roses on the stone wall between the cottage and the main house. A single white bloom rested on top. No note, no explanation. She smiled anyway. Julian watched from the window again. He told himself it was coincidence, that he just happened to be there, just happened to glance down as she picked up the rose and pressed it to her nose like it was something rare. It was Clara's idea. She'd been the estate's caretaker for over a decade, sharp as ever, with eyes that saw more than they let on. "I left a few cuttings on the wall," she said casually while bringing Julian his tea. The tourist seemed fond of them. He didn't respond. He rarely did. But Clara caught the flicker in his eyes. Later that afternoon, Lena wandered back toward the garden with her camera. She didn't expect to see him there, kneeling in the dirt with a pair of shears in one hand and soil on his palm. Their eyes met. "I thought you didn't like people in your space," she said, cautious but curious. Julian stood, brushing his hands against his jeans. "I don't." "Then I must be an exception." "You're a complication," he said. She blinked. "Should I leave?" "No." His voice was quiet but certain. "Stay." The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was electric. Like the air between them had agreed on something neither of them had said aloud. She stepped closer, glancing at the tangled rosebush behind him. "You always this charming when guests accidentally trespass?" "I don't usually have guests." Lena smiled. "Then I guess we're both out of our depth." Julian let out a breath, not quite a laugh. "Seems like it." They stood there, inches apart, sunlight slipping between the leaves, shadows dancing across their faces. And for a brief, suspended second, nothing else mattered. Not who he was, not what she was running from, not the risk of getting close. Just this moment, this quiet, strange pull. Then she turned slowly. "Thank you for the roses," she said. Julian watched her walk away, unsure if he wanted her to stop or keep going before she got too close. Lena couldn't sleep. The cottage was quiet, the windows open just enough to let in the breeze and the sound of distant waves brushing the cliffs. She stared at the ceiling, the sheets tangled at her ankles, her mind spinning with the way Julian had looked at her. Like he wanted to say something but couldn't. Like he wanted to touch her but wouldn't. She slipped out of bed and stepped outside, arms wrapped around herself. The moon hung low, casting silver light across the path that led to the garden. And there he was. Julian stood by the roses, back turned, shoulders tense, as if he'd been drawn there by the same restless pull. She didn't speak right away, just watched him. He turned slowly when he sensed her, as if he'd known she'd come. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked, his voice lower at night, edged with something unguarded. Lena shook her head. "Too quiet. Or maybe too loud in here," she added, tapping her temple. Julian gave a half smile. "I know that feeling." They stood in silence again. But it wasn't uncomfortable. It was charged. "I don't usually meet people like you," he said. She raised an eyebrow. "Tourists?" "No, people who don't want something from me." Lena tilted her head. "Should I? Would that make things easier?" "Easier, yes. Better, no." A pause. The wind shifted. "You look different at night," he said quietly. She laughed under her breath. "You're full of surprises, Julian Hale." He didn't flinch at the name. "You looked me up. I'd be reckless not to. And now?" She stepped closer, her bare feet brushing against the edge of the stone path. "Now I think I'd rather learn who you are without the headlines." That made him look at her. Really look at her. "Good luck," he said, barely a whisper. "I'm not always sure myself." She reached out, brushing her fingers across the petals of a nearby rose. "You don't need to be sure," she said, "just honest." Julian took a step closer. Not enough to touch, but close enough to feel the warmth of her skin. "I haven't been honest with anyone in a long time." She looked up at him. "Then maybe it's time to start." A gust of wind moved between them. And with it, something else shifted too. He didn't kiss her, not yet. But the space between them had never felt smaller. The next day, Julian didn't come to the garden. Lena waited longer than she admitted. Pretended to read. Pretended not to glance up every time the breeze shifted the hedges near the main house. But he didn't come. She should have expected it. Men like him didn't linger. They vanished just when things started to feel real. Still, it stung. She took the coastal trail in the afternoon, hoping the wind and the ocean would clear her head. It didn't. Every time she closed her eyes, she heard his voice. Low, uncertain, almost intimate. "You look different at night." Back at the cottage, she sat on the porch steps until the light faded. The roses had started to droop, as if they missed him too. Julian watched from the study window. He told himself he was busy. There were emails, investors waiting, decisions to be made. But none of it moved him. She did. Lena Carter, with her sundresses and unfiltered smiles, had wormed her way into places he'd long closed off. She didn't ask for anything, which made it harder to ignore her. He thought distance would dull it. It didn't. Clara entered quietly. "She's still here." "I know," he said. "She looks sad today." Julian's jaw tightened. "It's for the best." Clara gave him a long look. "If you say so." She left him alone with the silence, the one he used to crave. Now it scraped. That night, Lena stayed inside. She lit a candle, cooked herself a lazy pasta, wrote half a sentence in her journal, then crossed it out. She wasn't angry, just disappointed. He didn't owe her anything. They barely knew each other, and yet every moment they'd shared had felt so much more alive than anything in her life lately. She was tired of almosts, almost staying, almost falling, almost mattering. So she didn't wait by the roses this time. She stayed behind the glass, watching the wind pull at the trees, and wondered what it would take for a man like Julian to stop running and start reaching. Just once, even if it wasn't for long. The rain came suddenly that afternoon. Thick, steady drops. The kind that muted everything, sound, thought, even the ache that had settled in Lena's chest. She stayed inside, curled beneath the thin blanket on the couch. Journal open beside her but untouched. Outside the garden blurred. The roses wilted, heavy with water. The stone path where Julian once stood was slick and empty. She told herself she was being silly, that she hadn't come here for him, that she wasn't hoping he'd appear again, just to prove the connection wasn't all in her head. But it was harder to lie when the walls were quiet and her heartbeat was loud. By late afternoon, the storm softened to a drizzle. She stood by the window, watching the mist roll in, her fingers wrapped around a warm mug. Her reflection looked tired, like someone caught between letting go and still wanting more. A knock came, soft but deliberate. She turned, confused. The door opened slowly, and there he was. Julian stood on her porch, hair damp, coat clinging to his shoulders, eyes unreadable. She blinked. "You're wet." "I know. I thought you were avoiding me." He exhaled. "I was." "And now?" His eyes met hers. "Now I'm tired of pretending I don't care." The words hung in the space between them like thunder after lightning, quiet, but impossible to ignore. She stepped aside without speaking. He entered slowly, as if unsure he'd be welcome. The room felt warmer somehow. The candle still burned on the table. The air smelled of rosemary and rain. Julian stood near the window, silent. Then, "I'm not good at this." "At being human?" she asked gently. "At being open?" She moved closer. "I'm not asking for your secrets." "What are you asking for?" Lena tilted her head. "Honesty. Moments that mean something. A reason to stay longer than planned." He looked at her then. Really looked. And something in him cracked just enough to let the light in. "I don't know how to give you that." "Then let me help you find out." Julian didn't answer, but he stayed. He stayed while the candle burned low and the rain tapped gently against the windows. He stayed as she sat beside him, not asking for anything more than his presence. And in that silence, something softer bloomed, something neither of them knew how to name yet, but both were afraid to lose. The next morning the storm was gone. Lena stepped outside barefoot, the stone path cool and damp beneath her. Everything smelled fresh, like the world had been washed clean overnight. She didn't expect to see him again. Not so soon. But there he was, crouched by the garden wall, inspecting the damage. Julian looked up at the sound of her steps. His eyes found hers, and for a moment, they just stood there, watching each other like last night hadn't happened, but neither of them could forget it. "The roses took a hit," he said. "So did my mood." His lips curved slightly. "Mine too." She walked over, crouching beside him. We could save them, you know. Cut the broken stems, tie the others. They'll come back. Julian glanced sideways at her. You always talk about flowers like people. They're not that different. I wouldn't know where to start. I'd show you. Their hands brushed as she reached for the shears he held. Neither moved. Rain began again. Not heavy, but soft and steady, like the kind that doesn't ask for shelter. Lena tilted her face to the sky. Of course. Julian laughed, quiet and rare. You don't seem bothered. It's warm rain, the best kind. He looked at her for a beat, then stood, offering a hand. Come on. Where are we going? He didn't answer. They walked across the lawn, rain threading through their hair, dampening the edges of her dress and his rolled-up sleeves. She let out a breathless laugh as her sandal slipped slightly in the grass. You'll ruin your shoes, he said. They're not worth saving. Julian stopped under the canopy of the old olive tree. The air smelled of wet leaves and sea wind. He looked at her like she wasn't what he expected, but maybe exactly what he needed. You always let things just happen? He asked. Not always. She paused, then added softly, but I'm tired of running from moments that feel good. His jaw clenched, like the words hit too close. You're not the only one. For a second, the distance between them felt like nothing, like it would take just a breath to close it, and maybe he would have. Maybe he would have leaned in, kissed her rain-slick mouth, let everything else fall away. But then she smiled, soft, not seductive, and turned toward the cottage. We should dry off before Clara sees us and thinks we've lost our minds. Julian followed, slower this time, hands still tingling from where they'd touched. They didn't speak again until the door closed behind them. And even then, the silence felt full. Julian stood by the fire, the cuffs of his shirt still damp from the rain. Lena handed him a towel, their fingers brushing for a brief moment before he looked away. You didn't have to follow me, she said. I know, but you did. He nodded slowly. I wanted to see what it felt like. To get wet? To not overthink everything. She smiled and leaned against the doorway, arms folded loosely. You're not as difficult as you think. Julian let out a quiet breath. I'm worse. Silence settled between them again, but it wasn't cold. It was waiting. Lena crossed the room slowly, took the seat across from him, and pulled her knees up on the cushion. The fire popped softly beside them, casting gold across the walls. You know, she said, you talk like someone who's spent a long time alone. He met her gaze. Because I have. I don't mean physically, I mean inside. Julian didn't respond at first, just stared into the flames. Then quietly, when people want something from you long enough, you stop offering parts of yourself. It's easier. But it's not better. No, he said, it's not. She shifted slightly, drawing her blanket tighter. So why me? Why let me in at all? Julian looked at her for a long moment. Not with calculation, but with something closer to surrender. Because you're not trying to fix me, you're just here. The fire crackled between them. She didn't push further. Before the company, I used to build things, he added, voice distant. Real things, wood, stone. My hands were always busy. And now? They're just tired. Lena exhaled slowly, the weight of his honesty wrapping around her chest. Then maybe it's time to build something again, she whispered. His eyes flicked to hers. There was no smile, but the tension in his shoulders loosened. You always talk like hope is easy. No, she said. I just talk like I haven't given up on it yet. He looked at her like she was a language he hadn't heard in years. Familiar, but forgotten. And for a long while they said nothing, just sat with the warmth between them, as two tired hearts tried to remember how to feel safe again. The rain returned after midnight, not loud, but steady. a quiet rhythm against the windows that wrapped the cottage in a hush. Julian hadn't left. He sat in the armchair by the fire, legs stretched, shirt sleeves still rolled. Lena curled on the couch, blanket pulled to her chin, a half-empty glass of wine beside her. She wasn't drunk, but she was tired, in the way that had nothing to do with sleep. "You know," she said softly, "I used to plan everything." Julian looked over, brows raised slightly. "I had a 5-year plan, a color-coded calendar. I even mapped out how many books I'd read per month." He gave a small smile, and now I'm here, with a stranger in my cottage, listening to rain and forgetting what day it is. "You say that like it's a bad thing." She shook her head slowly. "No, just different." A long pause. "I was engaged," she said. Julian didn't move. 2 years, we had a condo, matching bathrobes, the whole boring future. "What happened?" She let out a humorless laugh. "I found out he was in love, with someone else, and I wasn't even angry, just numb." Julian's voice was low. "That's worse." "Yeah." She sat up a little, letting her legs fall to the floor. The firelight caught the edge of her expression, soft, but edged with something deeper. "I think I came here to disappear. But then you showed up, with your sad eyes and quiet silences, and suddenly I didn't feel invisible anymore." Julian leaned forward slightly. "You're not invisible." Lena looked at him steady. "Then stop treating me like I might break if you get too close." The words hung between them. He didn't move right away, but something in his face shifted, less guarded, more human. "I don't think you'd break," he said. "I think I would." And just like that, the space between them folded in on itself. He stood slowly, walked across the room and sat beside her. Not touching, not pushing, just there. Close enough to feel. The kind of closeness that wasn't loud or rushed. The kind that meant something. Lena closed her eyes for a moment. When she opened them again, she whispered, "Stay." He nodded once, and he did. The morning came too quietly. Lena stirred before the sun rose, her head resting against the back of the couch. A blanket slipped off one shoulder. She blinked into the soft blue light. Julian was still there, not watching her, not hovering, just asleep in the chair, arms crossed, his body turned slightly toward her, as if even in sleep, some part of him stayed tethered. She studied him. In rest, his features softened. The weight he always carried in his jaw, in the curve of his brow, it had eased. She saw the man behind the name. Not the billionaire, not the myth. Just him. She stood slowly, not wanting to wake him, but the floor creaked beneath her. Julian stirred. His eyes met hers instantly, groggy but alert. "Didn't mean to wake you," she whispered. "You didn't." They stayed like that for a moment, facing each other in the pale morning light, the warmth of last night still quietly clinging to the room. Lena moved toward the kitchen. "I'll make coffee." He followed. It wasn't much, just the hum of the kettle, the clink of mugs, but it felt like a ritual, something shared. When she handed him his cup, their fingers touched. Neither pulled away quickly. He took a slow sip, eyes on hers. "I almost kissed you last night." She didn't blink. "I know." "I didn't, because I wasn't sure if it would be for me or for you." "And now?" Julian stepped closer, the space between them thinning to a breath. "Now I'm not sure I care." Lena's voice was soft. "Then kiss me." But he didn't, not right away. He reached up first, brushing a strand of hair from her face, fingers lingering against her cheek. His touch was warm, but trembling ever so slightly, like a man trying not to fall, even as the ground gave way beneath him. Their foreheads touched. No rush, no bravado, just tension. His lips hovered near hers, close enough to taste her breath. Her eyes fluttered shut. Then a knock at the front door shattered the stillness. They pulled apart instantly. Julian's jaw tensed. Lena stepped back, blinking, heart pounding. He looked at the door. "Clara," he muttered. "Has to be." But neither moved. The moment had broken, but not vanished. It lingered in the air, pulsing between them. Lena exhaled shakily. "So, where do we go from here?" Julian looked at her for a long, quiet second. "Forward," he said, but slower than that. The knock was Clara. She carried a small basket of fresh bread and herbs, humming like she hadn't just walked in on something suspended in air. Julian took the basket with a nod. "Thanks." Clara glanced between them, her eyes warm but knowing. "Hope I'm not interrupting." "You're not," Lena said too quickly. Clara smiled faintly. "Of course not." She disappeared as quickly as she came, leaving behind a scent of rosemary and something unspoken. Julian stayed quiet for a moment, the tension still hanging like steam in the air. Lena turned toward the window. The clouds were clearing. "Back to reality?" she asked. Julian didn't answer, but his phone buzzed. Once, then again. He checked it, hesitated, then stepped toward the hallway. "I need to take this," he said. She nodded, but her smile didn't reach her eyes. Lena sat outside, alone, fingers tracing the rim of her coffee cup. The garden looked brighter than usual, but she didn't feel brighter. Julian had been gone 20 minutes. She told herself it didn't mean anything, but it felt like something had shifted. When he finally returned, his face had that same look he wore the first day she saw him, shuttered, unreadable. "I have to go into town later," he said. "For long?" "Just a few hours." She gave a small nod. "Business?" He paused. "A meeting. An old partner wants to talk." Lena swallowed the question she wanted to ask. "Are you going back?" Instead, she said, "I hope it's not the kind of meeting that pulls you out of this place." Julian looked at her then, eyes softer than before, but still far away. "This place isn't real," he said quietly. That stung more than she expected. "Maybe not," she said, "but what happens in it can be." Julian opened his mouth like he wanted to say more, but no words came. Instead, he stepped forward and kissed her forehead. Gentle, uncertain. Then he was gone. Lena watched the road long after the dust settled. She wasn't sure what hurt more. That he left, or that she wasn't sure if he'd come back the same. Julian didn't return before sunset. Lena didn't wait by the window this time. She tried to read, tried to focus, but the words slipped past her like fog. Her mind was elsewhere, on a road leading away, not toward her. The cottage felt colder without him. At midnight, the headlights appeared. She stayed on the porch, arms wrapped around her knees, watching as his car came to a stop near the garden gate. Julian stepped out slowly. He looked tired, creased at the eyes, jaw tight, shirt unbuttoned at the collar. He saw her, and stopped. "I didn't expect you to wait," he said. "I didn't plan to," she replied softly. He walked toward her but didn't sit. Just stood a few feet away, caught in the golden spill of porch light. "I saw Ethan," he said. "The business partner?" He nodded. "He made an offer, wants me back." "And do you want to?" Julian looked at her for a long time. "I don't know." That hurt more than she let show. "Being with you here," he continued, "has made me forget how heavy the world can be. But it's still there, Lena." "So am I," she said. "But maybe I won't be forever." Silence. "I don't want to be another thing you forget when reality comes calling." "You're not. Then prove it." Julian stepped forward, reaching out, but she stepped back. Don't touch me just to avoid the truth, she whispered. He dropped his hand. You think this is easy for me? No, she said, but maybe it's easier than staying. Julian stared at her like he didn't have the right words. Maybe he didn't. Lena stood slowly, her eyes glinting in the dark. I didn't come here looking for love, but I found something that felt close. If you're going to run, do it. Just don't ask me to wait while you figure out whether or not I'm worth it. He didn't chase her as she walked inside, and she didn't turn back when she closed the door. But on the other side of it, she pressed her palm to the wood and waited for the sound of footsteps. They never came. The morning came quietly. Lena packed slowly, not out of hesitation, but out of grief, the kind that felt too quiet to name. Her hands folded clothes like they didn't belong to her anymore. The cottage didn't feel like hers either. Not really. Maybe it never did. She stood by the mirror and looked at herself. Not broken, but not whole. A version of herself that had almost dared to believe. Clara knocked once and let herself in, carrying a tray of tea and warm bread. You're leaving, she said softly. Lena nodded. It's time. Clara placed the tray down. He won't stop you, you know. I figured. But he'll regret it. Lena gave a tired smile. He's allowed to choose his life. Yes, Clara said. But he can't have both if he won't reach for either. Julian stood alone in the study. The house felt emptier than it had in years, even though it wasn't empty yet. Her voice still echoed faintly in his mind. The warmth of her eyes, the sound of her breath beside him when she was half asleep. The peace she brought into every room without trying. He'd pushed people away before, but this time it didn't feel like self-preservation. It felt like failure. Ethan had called again. The deal was on the table. His life, the one with control, power, certainty, was waiting. But for the first time, it didn't feel like enough. He left the house without thinking. Lena zipped her suitcase. She took one last look around the cottage. Her hand brushed the doorknob and paused. Then, behind her, the front door creaked open. Julian stood there, wind in his hair, eyes shadowed by something unspoken. You're really leaving, he said. I told you I would. His jaw flexed. I thought maybe you wouldn't. I gave you a chance, she said, voice trembling. More than one. I know, she swallowed. Then why didn't you take it? Julian stepped forward. Because I was scared. So was I. He looked at her suitcase. You still are. Difference is, she said, I showed up anyway. A pause. The room felt full and empty all at once. I don't know how to do this, Julian said. Then start small, she whispered. Start by asking me to stay. He didn't speak, didn't move, so she turned to the door, and that's when he said it. Stay. She froze, then slowly turned back to him. His voice broke on the next word. Please. Lena didn't move right away. The word hung in the air like a held breath. Stay. Then softer, like it hurt to say, please. She turned back toward him slowly, unsure if she was dreaming. Julian stood in the doorway, hands curled into fists, as if holding himself together by force. His shoulders rose and fell like every breath was a decision. You don't have to say it if you don't mean it, she said quietly. I do, he replied. I've never meant anything more. He took a step forward. Everything in my life has been built on knowing what comes next. Numbers, deals, control. But you... He paused, searching her face. You make me forget all of that. And I've never felt more like myself. Lena blinked, eyes stinging. Then why did you almost let me go? Because I didn't think I deserved you. She let out a soft, aching sound. Then don't ask for perfection. Just be real. I can do real, he said. needed to remember how. Another step, close enough now to reach her. I want you here, Lena, not just in this house, in my life. She looked up at him, eyes shimmering. You don't get to say that unless you mean all of it. I do. His hand found hers, slow, warm, steady. She didn't pull away. I'm still scared, he admitted. So am I, she whispered. And then finally he kissed her. Not hurried, not tentative. It was the kind of kiss that silenced the past, that rewrote every almost, every goodbye, every unspoken word between them. His hands cupped her face, her fingers curled into his shirt, and they clung to each other like the only thing left was this moment. When they pulled apart, they didn't speak. They didn't have to. Their foreheads touched, breathing the same breath. You really want me to stay? She asked. I need you to. She smiled through a tear. Then unpack my bag. He let out a breath of laughter. That's the first command I'm happy to take. They stood there for a long time, no longer strangers, no longer pretending. Just two broken people who had finally decided not to run. Julian didn't unpack her bag right away. Instead, he made her tea. Lena sat on the couch, legs tucked beneath her, watching as he moved through the tiny kitchen like he'd lived there forever. He was still barefoot, his sleeves rolled, his hair a little messy from running through the wind. There was something beautiful in the way he didn't rush, as if staying had already changed him. He handed her a mug and sat beside her, their knees touching. I don't think I've ever made tea for someone before, he said. She smirked. You're a natural. He sipped his own, then glanced sideways. You're really staying? She nodded. For now. That's enough. They drank in silence for a while, not awkward, just comfortable. Lena rested her head on his shoulder. Julian froze for half a second, then relaxed into it. His fingers found hers again, weaving together like it had always been meant to happen. You know, she said, I didn't come here for anyone but myself. I'm glad you did. I still want to see the world. You will. She looked up at him. With you? Julian smiled, small but real. If you'll have me. They didn't make grand promises. No vows, no forever. Just closeness, just presence. He kissed her hair. She closed her eyes. The next day they walked to the village together, hand in hand. Clara spotted them from across the square and raised a brow but said nothing. Her smile said everything. They bought fresh fruit, shared coffee on a bench, spoke quietly like they were figuring out how to be in the world together now. Julian didn't check his phone once. Later, back at the cottage, Lena found her suitcase still zipped in the corner. She looked at Julian. He raised an eyebrow. Permission to unpack? She smiled. Granted. He knelt beside the bag and slowly folded her clothes into an empty drawer. One shirt at a time. No fanfare. No speeches. It was the most intimate thing he'd ever done. When he finished, he looked up at her. She didn't say thank you. She just crossed the room and pulled him into a quiet hug. And in that embrace, it became clear. They weren't just staying in the same place. They were finally staying with each other. The wind outside had softened. The last light of day spilled across the cottage floor, golden and still. Julian sat on the edge of the bed, unbuttoning his cuffs slowly, like he wasn't ready for the evening to end. Lena stood near the window, hair loose, her bare feet silent against the old wood. She watched the sea fade into night, her arms wrapped around herself. Not cold, just still. He looked at her, not the way he had in the beginning, with distance and caution, but like she was something he already knew by heart. You keep looking at me like I might vanish, she said softly. Julian shook his head. No, I'm just making sure you're really here. I am. She turned to face him, stepping closer, the firelight from the hearth casting soft shadows behind her. He reached out. She let him pull her into his lap, her legs folding gently across his arms wrapped around her waist, her hands resting at the nape of his neck. They stayed like that for a while. No hurry. No heat that demanded more. Just closeness. Breath against breath. Skin against skin. "I don't know what comes next," he murmured. "You don't have to. What if I mess this up?" She smiled faintly. "Then we start again. I'm not going anywhere without trying first." He leaned forward, kissed her collarbone, slow and reverent. Her fingers combed through his hair, and when she whispered his name, it wasn't a question. It was a promise. They lay down side by side, tangled in sheets and silence. Not because there was nothing to say, but because sometimes saying nothing is the most honest way to feel everything. Later, as the fire burned low and the moon slipped into view, Julian watched her fall asleep beside him. And for the first time in years, he didn't feel alone in the dark. He felt found. Not because he'd planned for her, but because he hadn't and she stayed anyway. Thank you for spending your time with the Billionaire's unexpected guest. If this story touched you, even just a little, I hope you'll consider staying a little longer by subscribing, leaving a comment, or sharing it with someone who loves slow burn romance too. There are more stories like this waiting for you. And maybe you'll find a piece of yourself in them too. Until next time, love deeply and don't be afraid to stay.